I'm going to show you how to choose camera angles and add camera movement to make your stories more engaging and more dynamic. Okay, so this is going to be about 2D camera movement and composition in 2D animation. I'm taking less of a technical approach here. It's a way of thinking. I still receive messages from people quite often asking me how to create camera movement, especially 3D looking camera movement, how I hand draw that 3-dimensional camera movement. So I made a video a while back which talked about it, but I think it needs updating, and how I think about it really, and then how I translate that thought, that idea onto the screen. I think the fundamental thing you can do to improve your camera angles and your camera movement in 2D animation is to get yourself a real camera and start using it. Start experimenting with that camera. Practice using it. It doesn't have to be a Hollywood blockbuster. You can just take an item and see about the way you frame it, where the camera is relative to the object. It introduces you to things like focal lengths, and other important ideas and composition techniques and things. When I started using a real camera, it introduced a whole new world of composition to me and camera techniques, and I started following YouTube channels which were about photography and for photographers, but I was learning so much about photography and applying it to my 2D animations, and I think it really gave them an edge. You know, it made them a lot more cinematic and a lot more dynamic a lot of the time. And I continue to learn about cameras and photography and film today. In fact, I'd say I'm just as much influenced by the world of film and photography as I am from animation. Also, with a camera, you're more free to experiment. It doesn't take ages to draw out a shot from a certain camera angle. You can just move the camera there and then it's there. As well as that, the camera is situated in an actual 3-dimensional space. You are actually in the room with your object, and so it encourages you to think in this way in 3D. So whenever you hear me talk about compositions and things, you'll always hear me talk about the camera. There isn't a camera in 2D animation. You're drawing on a canvas, but that's the way I see it. I imagine that I'm there with the camera, framing it, shooting it, moving around. I'm going to get into the techniques though, and some ways that you can make your scenes more cinematic, more dynamic. So take a look at this. So here's a demonstration for you. Right here in the middle of this desk, I have this sculpture. It's just a sculpture of a bear. I made a storyboard a while back which involved a bear. I made this sculpture to just help me figure out the contours and things of the bear, because I wasn't used to making drawings of a bear at the time. It's a little bit dusty now, forgive me, and it's pretty rough. I'm going to make some observations about what happens when I move the camera at different angles and also the different focal lengths. So to start off, side on. So this creates a very flat image. It doesn't sell us on the 3D aspect of the bear. The horizon line is alright though. We've got it kind of not either up or down. We're just kind of in the center at eye level. The first thing we can do here is we can turn it on an angle. It demonstrates the 3 dimensions of the bear because it puts it at an angle. So now I'm going to change the relative height of the camera angle compared to the bear and see what it does. So first of all, let's go right up high like this and take a sort of bird's eye view. If I do it like this, the same perpendicular angle to the bear, that looks a bit weird, I think. Looks a little bit Wes Anderson like. So I would actually, if I was doing this shot, I'd put it at a diagonal angle like that or like that, and introduce those diagonal lines into the composition to make it look a little bit more natural. Okay, so now we will go less extreme than that, put it at an angle again, and just come up from high like this, and maybe pull back a little bit, which puts more of an emphasis on the environment the bear is in and less on the bear itself. When we bring it in like this, closer to the bear, we are more focused on the bear itself, more of the internal, perhaps the internal thoughts of the bear, and less about the environment. We're more in the bear's head. Let's bring the camera angle as low as possible. Now this is a small figurine on a desk, so it's a little bit difficult to do this, but if I put it here at the edge of the desk and bring the camera low, I think that looks super dynamic, very impactful. When you do that, it makes the bear look enormous, even though it's actually a really small figurine. When I come in close like this and bring it to a low angle, we instinctively think that the bear is massive. This is my go-to technique, especially in like action scenes and stuff. It makes it super engaging to bring it low like this. And you can see from this camera here, from my B-roll camera, where I am relative to the bear. Change the angle from being flat on with the character and bring it up or down a little bit, and that makes things a lot more interesting, a lot more subjective as to what's going on in the story. Focal lengths. So this is a really interesting dimension to photography, but also to any kind of composition, is imagining what kind of focal lengths you're using. But right now I'm basically using a Canon 10 to 18 millimeter lens. So right now I've got it set at 18. Now with focal lengths, the longer the focal length, the more zoomed in it is. So this is a very wide angle lens. From here to here you can fit a lot of information in. It's not zoomed into the center there. Now if I pull it out even further to 10 millimeters, this is what happens. Okay, so now if we adjust for that and we move into the same place, have a look at what it looks like now. So you can see that the bear's head is very large in the frame compared to the end of its torso. So anything that is close to the camera feels very close. It's kind of almost exaggerated. It's almost distorted in the way it feels. So you can see here when I start moving, there's a great difference in the camera movement and also the scale compared with the head and the tail. If I compensate for the zoom by moving in, you'll be able to see exactly the difference it makes. This is 18 going to 10. So I moved the camera in as I made that zoom. So we can see here that the 10, it exaggerates the distance. So anything that's further in the distance feels very far away. Anything that's close to us feels very near indeed. Okay, let's talk quickly about camera movement. Moving the camera to feel engaging. Let's say the character is moving along, let's say it's walking along. I will move the camera at the same rate. I won't follow him by pivoting like this a lot of the time. I'll actually follow, and that creates more movement in the camera. The environment is moving as well, and it's parallaxing, which gives it depth. Moving round like this is something that can look really nice. It can look really aesthetic by doing this. It's nice to showcase something, like if you've got a new car or something, you can move around it like this. But it's hard to pull off in 2D animation because you have to redraw the figure every time when you move around like this. Now when you swing around like this on a telephoto lens, it creates this really cool sort of rushing vortex around the character, which is one of my favorite techniques to do. Now you might think that this is weird, what am I watching here? This is adult playing with toys, but this is the same technique that they used for planning action sequences in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it's actually something that in the industry, in the film industry, they use for pre-visualization, or previs for short, and it's a really effective method.
That this angle was here, and when we finally walked onto the set in a year's time with the actors and the full set was built, we'd be able to find exactly the same angle on set as we had with the miniature.
So now I've demonstrated some of those ideas. Let's do a recap for what you can do to make your shots more dynamic. For the first tip, put your camera as close to the action as you can. So when the audience watches it, it makes you feel like the the action is happening around you and that you're involved in the situation. So number 2 is get your camera low and point it up at the action. It makes everything seem big. Psychologically, you pay attention to things that are big, and it makes things seem more grand and epic. Simulating a wide angle lens can look great for close-up action. These 3 first points combined, when used together, they make a great combination. Using a telephoto lens can also look very dynamic when tracking the movement of a character, because the background will feel like it's rushing past very quickly. Make use of Z-depth. So Z-depth grabs your attention like nothing else in film. So characters going from here all the way up to the camera like that engages with you. Much more than moving laterally from screen left to screen right. Not only that, but moving the camera closer to or further away from a still object also has a very profound effect. Next point, make use of parallax where appropriate. Parallax adds dimension to your composition. It demonstrates the 3D nature of your scene instead of just pivoting the camera. Sorry if I'm not using the correct terminology. There's one other little technique that I use in my compositions, and this is when I'm drawing them in the storyboard phase. I like to have curves which go outside of the frame and come back into the frame. Or if you're able to have objects on the periphery of your composition which are half in and half out, what that does is it demonstrates that there is life outside of the frame, that the frame continues past this box that you can see. So now let's talk about translating these real camera movements and camera angles into the world of 2D animations. So you have to draw it. So don't be afraid to actually download the images or photos onto your computer and either trace over them or just do observational drawings about them, where the horizon line is, things like that. I don't recommend using a VCam or any kind of drag and drop camera positioning where you move this little box, which is called the camera, around the frame. Instead, I recommend moving the drawings around to fit within the frame. And I believe this method makes you more conscious of the compositions that you're choosing, instead of just dragging and dropping a box on top and trying to position it that way. If you're going to do camera movement, to move the scene about and have the camera stay in the same position. So moving the camera in this way can be compared to steering a boat. You move the tiller arm of the boat to the left and it will take the boat right. Move the tiller arm of the boat to the right and it will take the boat left. It's a bit like that when you're moving the scene around a stationary frame. This takes a little bit of getting used to, but after a while it will seem natural and you can just take your time and work it out. After Effects, by the way, is where I do all of my digital camera movement. And then for other scenes I actually hand draw it all. When you're making these backgrounds which the camera is going to be moving through, sometimes you need to add multiple points of perspective and sometimes you need to measure things out. The solution I have for these complex things is pretty simple. At times I will zoom into points of the background painting and simulate the camera movement just by scrolling around, just to check that it works. I always try to give myself more room than I need on the canvas, and it's pretty easy to do this on Photoshop because you can just crop outwards to give yourself more room on the canvas. I'll also bring in a sketch of my character sometimes to put over the top and see if it looks right. Yeah, if you like these videos, if you want to help in any way, you can support me on Patreon, and the link to that will be in the description. As well as that, in the description I have a bunch of useful links. I've made a free PDF which is called the Animator's Checklist, which you can download for free. It's a very useful tool to help you in the animation process. So do open up the description and check out that and download that free PDF. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. I actually hit the camera there. Goodbye.